Welcome to the Blue Security Podcast, a weekly podcast for information security defenders, where we bring you discussions on best practices, tools, and implementation for enterprise security. Now, here are your hosts for today's show, Andy Jaw and Adam Brewer.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Blue Security Podcast. I'm Andy, your host.
I'm Adam, your co-host.
This week, I wanted to talk through Brett Arsenal's blog on Secure Future Initiative, which is called SFI at Microsoft. He published this blog, and it was about everything that Microsoft has done in the last 18 months on moving towards that more secure future. So SFI was announced back in 2023. And it was essentially a roadmap, multi-year effort to revolutionize how Microsoft looks at designing, building, and testing the products and services, and to try to achieve the highest security standard. It was a commitment by Microsoft to improve the security posture for the customers, for work with government, and for internal security posture for the entire ecosystem. And before we get into the things that have improved all of these efforts and all the things that Microsoft has done, Adam, if you want to give your quick disclosure, since we're talking about Microsoft here.
Sure. Andy and I both work for Microsoft in our field security sales business. We do this show outside of work on our own time, and we have self-funded the show as well in terms of our recording platform, our domains, so on and so forth. So it's a labor of love that is not directly funded or controlled by Microsoft. But of course, we do both work there. We think our listeners and viewers should know that in full disclosure. And although Microsoft does not have editorial control over the show, doesn't tell us what to talk about or not talk about. Of course, as employees, we want to remain in the good graces of our employer. So just be aware of that as we go through today's discussion. But of course, the one nice thing about Microsoft is we certainly have an ability to, I think, be fairly critical about our own organization and talk about what we do right and what we do wrong. And we certainly enjoy a high level of latitude compared to other organizations where you're basically not allowed to speak in public or host a podcast or have a social media presence outside of work. Microsoft does a really nice job of allowing a lot of freedom, and we don't take that for granted, and we certainly don't want to lose that privilege by abusing it. Just be aware of all of that as we go through today's discussion. But for the most part, this should be, as we always talk about on the show, an academic discussion where we're talking about facts and figures and things we can share and actionable guidance or suggestions you can take with you to your own organization that you are trying to defend.
So we'll start off with identity. And there's been several different things that Microsoft has done with identity to try to, in efforts of this SFI, Secure Future Initiative. So in October of 2024, we did talk about this on the show. Microsoft implemented mandatory multi-factor authentication for the Azure portal, admin, intra-admin, and into admin center. And that was something that was impactful for a lot of folks. I know that you could go in there and delay it, but you can only delay it for so long until you kind of get those controls put in yourself. So that was turned on by default. So a lot of things, just in general, secure by default is we're turning it on. And so mandatory multi-factor. Microsoft account, so like the consumer account users can now remove passwords from their accounts and use passkeys instead. So I have had the password removed from my Microsoft account for a few years now. There has been no password associated with it.
Andy, did you see we just announced literally yesterday or the day before that? We're recording this Saturday morning on May 3rd. Microsoft has now announced that by default, new Microsoft accounts, those consumer accounts, will not have a password. The new sign-up flow will encourage you to use passwordless methodologies from the get-go. And not only will you not need to remove a password, you'll just never set one in the first place. So taking it to that next step now, literally in the last day or two.
Yeah, that's definitely one of those things. Again, that path to passwordless. By default, the user, when they're signed in, when they create a new account, the first option that pops up is, let's get a passkey associated with it. So, and that's great because most users are probably going to take that first option and not do a password. If you can do a passkey and you can, scan a QR code or whatever it is, Windows Hello for Business, store a passkey there, then that's going to be the best way possible. Yeah, in last month, that new sign-in experience was launched, and everyone has this optimized passwordless first experience. So I was able to test this with, been passwordless for years. I've had a Yubico passkey, when we all know that most non-security folks are not going to like have a hardware token with them and plug it in for their passkey. So I tried the passkey on my phone. I have an iPhone, and I was able to do it with 1Password, store a passkey in my 1Password. I was able to do it in my Apple keychain, do it that way. But interesting enough, the passwordless method that I've been using, with the Microsoft Authenticator, I was not able to store a passkey with my Authenticator. And I'm curious why that is, which, we do have passkeys available for Entra with Entra 8, identity for businesses to have passkeys in there. But I guess that part hasn't flowed down quite yet to the Authenticator app for MSAs, the Microsoft accounts. But I mean, it's something that you're able to do for third party, which is great, because if you have an iPhone, if you have an Android phone, those can store passkeys in themselves. And then, as far as we're talking about identity, one of the things internally, and this is kind of like a flavor that we wanted to give our listeners, is as Microsoft employees, phish-resistant MFA was implemented company-wide in a pretty short period of time. Like it just kind of came down, everyone in the field, all of a sudden you just have to register your authenticator as passwordless. You had to have a passwordless method to get in. You could use a Yubico, a company issued Yubico key to do that as well. You could have a physical key registered. You just request one. So it wasn't provided by default, but you can go in and request one if you wanted one, which I think Adam and I both did. But for the phones, we all have Intune on our work phones, whatever phone you're using for work with email. Multi-factor has been obviously enabled by default long ago, but then just it popped up and it's like, you must register your phone as a passkey. And this was just like, I don't remember a whole lot of communication. I might have saw one email come out or something like that, and then it just was implemented and people just did it. And all of a sudden, like, we have it. And I think that often speaks to, like, Adam, what you talk about is that a lot of times IT doesn't give enough credit to how smart users are these days with technology. And we kind of like hem and haw about the things that we're going to deploy. But, if you provide communication, like kind of a CYA type deal, and then you put the policy in, most users are just going to go along with it.
Yeah. So you hear less today of things like, I saw a joke about how at RSA, we finally defeated hearing about zero trust constantly at RSA because now it was all AI. I was at the RSA conference in San Francisco this last week, and certainly AI is the flavor of the month. So identity, of course, is still foundational to security. It is still the control plane, still foundational to a zero trust strategy. And that has not changed, even if the flavor of the day has. And so hardening identity is always a really positive thing. And I kind of touched on the last thing first, Andy. You talked about our employee experience, where Microsoft moved 220,000 employees and vendors to phish-resistant MFA in a very short period of time. I believe it was practically 30 days. Like you said, some communication, but basically it was, you're doing this, the end, and it's not up for discussion. It's just happening. And I agree. And I like that you called back to my theory on this is there tends to be a desire to overcomplicate change sometimes. And ultimately, there are some changes that just need to get done. And this was one of them. And I would encourage a lot more organizations. It's really, if you can get to phish-resistant MFA, you are going to make your life a lot easier. How much time are you spending on attacks that could be mitigated by deploying phish-resistant MFA? And wouldn't you rather spend your time on improving your posture than maintaining the status quo? I know I would. And so that's something to think about. And we were successful at scale with it. And to be honest, I'm in sales. I work with a lot of salespeople who are non-technical, account executives, other solution area specialists who are not security practitioners. I don't hear anyone complaining about this. I don't hear anyone saying, oh man, I can't log in. It's such a pain now. Nobody talks about that. We all just did it. We recognized the value and got it done. And I do like that. I think the model was perfect to say, if you want a hardware security key, you may request one and we will mail you one. No questions asked. We'll just send you one. If you want it, you can have it. If you don't, you can just use your phone and that's fine. I like having something that exists outside my phone because phones get lost and stolen and broken that is pretty resilient. Yubico makes a great product, and I have the YubiKey Series 5 FIPS compliant with the USB-C on the end, and it's a great product. It's fantastic. Not a sponsor of the show, but certainly we've been fans of Yubico and their YubiKey line of hardware security keys for years, and highly recommend them. And when you get into this, well, we've got people who don't want their phones. Fine, give them a YubiKey. Like, stop making this hard. You know what the answers are, so go do it instead of just spinning your wheels on it. So huge improvement. And then we talked already about some of the changes with the Microsoft account, the consumer-facing account, but we use that a lot as a test bed for changes we want to make in enterprise accounts. And we do recognize that we delegate some of the authority and decision-making to enterprise customers and to small, medium, and commercial customers as well on how they want to manage their identity. And we recognize that. But at the same time, when there are changes we can make that will significantly drive the state of security forward, we will do that. And we have done that in the past with Entra, where we've done things like deprioritize the ability to use voice or SMS methods and prioritize stronger methods by default, where we've run registration campaigns to encourage users to register stronger factors than SMS or voice. We've done a lot of those efforts over time because we know even though there could be some friction with customers, it's the right thing to do, and it will so radically move the state of security forward for our customers that it's worth doing and helping nudge them into that direction. But we use learnings from MSA for that. So what drove a lot of those was we did it in MSA Microsoft account first, and we saw a ton of success. And so MSA has really become this test bed for us to trial new technologies or new concepts or new strategies and see how they work, and then bring them to Entra ID over time. And so this is the latest in a long series of that, where, Andy, you talked about prioritizing passkey sign-in flow. And then we flip the switch again to be like, that is the sign-in flow. We are not even going to present the option of setting a password anymore. All MSAs will be passwordless by default. So when we talk about secure by design, secure by default as part of our Secure Future initiative, here's a perfect example. We are making Microsoft accounts secure by default and secure by design, in that they just don't ship with passwords. We're putting our money where our mouth is. We've said for years, passwords need to go away. Passwords need to die. A slow death, but still a death nonetheless. And here's us doing that in something we wholly control and manage. And would love to see other major identity providers out there, Apple, Google, follow in our footsteps. This is awesome. I'm really thrilled about this, and thrilled to finally, I've been at Microsoft 8 years talking about going passwordless forever. Seeing that finally come to reality is like the first time I rode in an electric car. It's like something you've heard about forever, this future thing finally happening. And that's really cool to see. Very excited about this, and excited to see when this comes to Entra ID over time, because we have said eventually we will make it possible, of course, to have an Entra ID account that doesn't have a password as well. I mean, I literally, we say this all the time, but I'm dead serious. I don't know what my Entra ID password is today. I don't think I can use it because we at Microsoft mandate phish resistant MFA for sign-in now. So I don't think it's even an option, but I literally don't know what it is. So in all practicality, I'm already passwordless there because I'm passwordless in my head, if nothing else. But eventually, yes, to not even have one set, to not even have one associated to the object, that's obviously the dream.
And we can't even be like, in my mind, we can't be phished, because if I even get asked for a password for my Microsoft password, I am immediately
bogus.
Yeah, I'm immediately suspicious because I never enter in my password ever.
Yeah.
So
I can't be phished because I don't know what it is anyway. So there you go.
That too.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've also made all these like little changes too. Like you mentioned, the priority for the multi-factor.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be that the multi-factor method that you've registered, that you signed in with last, was the one that you would be prompted for. So if I had SMS and I also had an MFA, if the last time I signed in, I used my text message to enter it in, it would prompt that for me again. But now the recommended way, if you were to change that, is it's going to always prompt you for the most secure MFA that's registered.
Yes.
And that's just a small thing, but it's like such a great change that no one really notices because you already have it registered on the account. It's just going to prompt you for the most secure method to do that.
The tyranny of the default. We talk about it all the time on this show. Users will use the default. And when, for whatever reason, maybe one time they didn't have their phone with, they didn't have their authenticator app working or whatever. And so they said, send me a text message. Okay. Got a text message. And then next time it prompts for a text message, they go, oh, okay, I guess that's what it wants. And they just keep using it. And so it's that subtle nudge towards other methods that are already registered. We're not asking users to register anything new in that flow, but it's already registered and it's stronger. And so instead of, let's get them off of those weaker methods, it's not that we aren't allowing them. You can still use it if you want. Highly not recommended today, but that subtle nudge in the right direction, to me, that's good product design. And that's using our responsibility and stewardship of one of the largest identity providers in the world, if not the largest enterprise identity platform in the world, to make those positive changes. And that's the right thing to do. And that's how you drive the state of security forward in a gentle but effective way.
And one last thing before we moved on, just a side note, Adam, you mentioned, working with a lot of non-technical folks and this not being an issue in their daily lives. And that's also because Windows Hello for Business is considered phish resistant and can act as a pass key. So for the majority of Microsoft employees who are issued a Windows computer, we've had Windows Hello for Business enabled for many, many years. You can register a pass key to that. And it's just when you get prompted, they don't even know. Because they sign in with their Windows Hello for Business, it's already registered as a phish resistant. That token gets passed to Entra, satisfies the conditional access requirement, and it's just seamless for the user. If you're on a Mac, it's going to be a little bit different. I've used a Mac as my daily driver before, and so you do get prompted a little bit more often for that in most cases. But for the most part, it is very transparent to the user once they have their phish resistant method registered, including just signing in with your face or a PIN.
And I can think of one example, Andy, where this actually is now a better user experience than it was before. Our benefits portal, we use this as an example all the time because our benefits portal is one of the few portals that requires re-authentication every time you hit it, or maybe it's an hour. It's a very short timeout. And so it used to be, I need to go to my benefits portal, better pick up my cell phone and get ready to get a number match on the authenticator app because that's how it worked. Well, now that I can use a passkey that's built into Windows Hello that's on my Surface laptop already, I go to the benefits portal, it just pops up, boom, let me scan your face. Okay, done. Okay, I'm in. Like, it's so frictionless. It's like one extra click right on my PC. It doesn't even take me out of the flow of what I'm doing. So that's actually an improved experience. And that could be why we don't hear a lot from non-technical users, is in many ways, the experience has actually gotten better now with the drive to phish resistant methodologies because it delivers that better experience right on the PC as an example.
And that is, again, one final thought. If you
haven't
deployed
this is like
Windows Hello for Business, that is like a security unicorn. Just like Adam said, it is not only more secure in most cases, it is also a better user experience. And it's very rare that we have something in security where it not only makes something more secure, but also a better user experience. So get to it if you haven't deployed that.
Yes, please.
Okay, so moving on here, there was a whole section in this blog about reducing an entire class of vulnerabilities. I thought this was super interesting. I'm not a developer by trade, but this talked about how a lot of the things that we've done on the developer side have essentially gotten away and reduced vulnerabilities, instead of trying to mitigate them. So like in most cases with programming and with developing, you try to mitigate the vulnerabilities today, like SQL injection, cross-site scripting, memory safe language vulnerabilities, by eliminating authorization of like validation logic mistakes, enabling the use of memory safe language, creating secure firmware architectures. But you're minimizing the risks and not really addressing the things at the root. There's a lot of things that Microsoft is doing, like the mandatory use of the Microsoft Authentication Library, or MSAL, across all Microsoft applications. And that does a lot of things for our identity stack from a developer standpoint. Like, these applications with the MSAL library can ensure that like advanced identity defenses, token binding, continuous access evaluation, advanced application attack detections are all consistently implemented. And then Microsoft is also committing to adopting memory safe languages like Rust for developing new products and transitioning existing ones. And then there's been a lot done to Windows as well where there is a secure by design strategy for everything that we're doing there. And so there's a security hardware security baseline that now ensures that every single Windows 11 PC has consistent hardware security. There's also some new default settings and stronger controls for what apps and drivers are allowed to run. So like for example, with small organizations and consumers, there's the smart app control, which is a new feature that uses cloud AI to enable millions of known safe apps to run regardless of where you get them from. And for larger organizations, admins can layer on app control for business policies and deploy them using Intune. At Ignite 2024, last year, Microsoft announced the Windows Resilience Initiative, which is focused on enhancing security and resilience for the Windows operating system. And as part of this, Microsoft was addressing the longstanding challenge of overprivileged users and applications. This was something that actually was not on my radar, was announced at Ignite, is in preview today, and it is such an amazing feature. I was reading through this blog and I was like, what is this? And I clicked on it because there's a whole, tech community blog about it. And it's something called admin protection. I have no idea how this skipped my radar, but admin protection, how it works is essentially you have standard users by default, user permissions by default. And then when you need them, you get essentially a UAC prompt, but that UAC prompt will give you a temporary admin token. So if you're authorized with the UAC prompt, and it's set by group policy or Intune, there's a special policy registry key that is set to use this admin protection. And when you're using that, you have people who are authorized to be admins, but they're not admins normally. You get the UAC prompt to become an admin, and what it does is it issues that temporary token, and you become an admin for that whatever thing that you need, and then that token is destroyed and is not persistent. So it's essentially a just-in-time admin access for Windows, which is that's kind of revolutionary to me. I stopped in my tracks when I read this, and I think we'll dive a little bit deeper into that and how it works in another show, because I'm like, we got to talk about this. But stuff like that is coming down the pipeline, and there's all sorts of things. The Pluton processor, which is our way, we've been developing that for many years now, close to 5 years. It was announced back in 2020, where the TPM chip is integrated with the CPU, and so that negates the sniffing of the TPM for BitLocker. Those are now readily being deployed in a lot of the cloud PCs. It's been
Copilot plus PCs too.
Copilot plus PCs. So that with partnerships with Intel and AMD, and you talk about and Qualcomm, yes, of course, yeah. And Adam, it's interesting because you talked about how like MSA is kind of the test bed of some identity stuff. And the Pluton processor was actually developed from Xbox. We tested it in Xbox back in Xbox One. And so it's really cool to see some of this technology that we've tested in the consumer world flow into the enterprise world. And then, the organizations get that benefit from that. So a lot happening there from a Windows perspective.
Well, last thing first, talking about Pluton and Xbox, there's an old adage, of course, that if you have physical access, you will eventually have access. And yet, there are millions of Xboxes sitting in people's homes, which you could consider, quote unquote, a hostile environment where someone could potentially try to break into them. But there is hardware root of trust on those to the point where the security measures on Xbox One and Xbox Series have not been defeated to this day. And those are effectively X-based 64 PCs with AMD silicon and AMD GPU built right in. That's what they are. And they run effectively a specialized version of Windows. Modern Xbox OS is running on Windows Core OS with some Xbox fairy dust sprinkled on top of it. So that's pretty cool. There's millions of Windows PCs out there in the world that have a hardware root of trust to the point where they only run trusted code all of the time. And despite there being millions of examples in the world with this hardware-based security, it has not been defeated, which is pretty incredible. So going back through some of the things you touched on here, the thing that stood out to me, a couple of just highlights, and again, we talked about we can be a little critical too. It's awesome that there's now mandatory use of the Microsoft Authentication Library, MCEL, I have to admit, I was a little surprised that was not already mandatory. Who is writing their own identity stack in a Microsoft product when we have this great library that does it all for you? Who wanted to reinvent the wheel? That also hits me as like the way we are measured internally at Microsoft. One of the ways we're measured are we call circles of impact. And there's the things you do on your own, the things you do to make other people and teams better, but then taking the work from other teams or individuals to improve your own work. Like I reinvented an identity library is not a way to fill that circle of saying I'm leveraging the work of others. Like it actually helps my review at Microsoft if I say, yeah, I leveraged the standard Microsoft authentication library for all the apps I built. Like that's a good thing. Your manager will score you higher than if you said I rebuilt it myself. So that was interesting.
Speaking of like, impact, like our reviews, our connects, like on all of them have a security block that we have to fill out. So how have you made Microsoft more secure? And of course that could mean like, I'm doing things in the field and making my customers more secure, but we are all measured on security now. Like that's a brand new thing for this year that wasn't on our reviews before. So that's something that we are measured on and like incentivized on for security.
You cannot get as good of a review, a connect, as we call them internally, and that could impact your rewards as well, which is some of the way we are rewarded for our impact. To use all the HR Microsoft language. But anyhow, it just that stood out to me because literally we are incentivized to leverage the work of others. So I can't believe someone was doing that. But hey, that's great news now. It's an awesome authentication library and gets you all the goodness by default. And you kind of walk through some of the Windows 11 improvements. Let's be honest, it's been cool to dog on Windows for its security posture and dunk on it for a long time. But David West and his team, they've been killing it on hardening Windows, and especially Windows 11. Windows 11 has a lot of security goodness in it since the day it shipped. And we took a lot of heat for requiring some pretty strong hardware requirements to meet these security commitments. And a lot of people thought they were going to play the game of chicken with Microsoft and that we would soften our stance on those standards, or we would walk away from end of life on Windows 10 at the end of this calendar year. And neither of those things are happening. End of life is proceeding. You may buy extended security updates if you choose, but you really should move to Windows 11 because you get a lot of security goodness with it. And Andy touched on some of it here. But this administrator protection, I do remember seeing that at Ignite last year. It was like one bullet in an entire blog post of enhancements, and it wasn't really teased out. It wasn't explained what it is. And that goes to me hand in glove also with some of the great technology in Intune enterprise permissions management, which can help you do elevation at an app level. So we have this certain app that doesn't play nice if I'm a standard user. They need to run it in an elevated privilege. It also does really cool stuff where it runs that as basically an ephemeral administrative user that is created when that app is launched. And when that app is killed, all of the user data associated with that ephemeral admin user is also deleted and destroyed. So that's related but separate from what's happening here, which is for any administrative action you need to take, it will be just in time administrator access, and then poof, it goes away. So we've done a lot of work with this, recognizing that administrative privileges have been very dangerous for a long time and are really doing a lot about it, which is super exciting. So some great engineering effort here. And Windows 11 across the board, I think I made the point on our last show, Andy, where we talked about Windows Hot Patch and Windows Quick Recovery. There is now enough goodness in there for enterprises, like let alone just the fact that end of life is coming here in 5 months. But there's a lot of good things happening there where you will get a lot of value out of moving to Windows 11 that will help run your enterprise in a more secure and a more resilient fashion moving forward. And so there's enough meat on that bone that hopefully you're running after your Windows 11 deployment pretty hard here and avoiding using extended security updates more than absolutely necessary. Because just total side note, as long as I'm on the subject, I keep saying very specifically, extended security updates. It is not extended support. And in fact, we announced recently the Office application, so the Microsoft 365 apps for enterprise, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, will not be supported on Windows 10 past its end of life here in October of 2025. You can still run them. We're not going to intentionally break them, but if they don't work, we're going to basically say, yeah, that's unsupported. Just because you're buying extended security updates does not mean it's supported. Those are two different concepts. It means you still get patches. It doesn't mean you can call up technical support and be like, hey, I found this thing. Why is it not working? They'll be like, yeah, well, Windows 10 is not supported anymore, so it's time to move on. So there's a lot of risk associated with extended security updates, and make sure you're doing that eyes wide open. In fact, that you are still in an unsupported state, you are just at least at a minimum staying secure. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, and again, a couple other thoughts here. We mentioned those little nudges towards becoming more secure. Windows 11, one of the features that is now enabled by default is Windows Defender Credential Guard, which protects against pass the hash attacks. And so that for enterprises is something that is enabled by default on new deployments of Windows 11. That happened a little while ago, but
yeah, like 22H2 maybe.
It's been a while, but those little things, those little design features of like, we're just going to enable this by default, virtualization based hardware security enabled by default, Defender Cred Guard enabled by default.
Windows Hello enhanced sign-in security enabled by default on Copilot Plus PCs.
Yep. And like for Surface devices, firmware getting deployed automatically, Windows patches, you mentioned hot patch. We talked about that last week. Security patches are getting deployed automatically and enabled by default. And so these are all things that are helping secure, millions of Windows PCs.
Shavings add up to a pile, as people often say, and these are all incremental changes, but they add up significantly. Credit Guard alone, you and I used to walk into customers all the time and be like, hey, are you using CredGuard? And they'd be like, what's that? I've never heard of it. And they already owned it. It's free. It's included. It's part of Windows. And they'd be like, oh yeah, we just haven't gotten to that. And so sometimes, despite best intentions, things don't happen. But if you just start shipping new PCs and like, this just comes with it, it's just turned on. They go, all right, yeah, well, we'll use it now. I mean, it's more work to turn it off. And so now you've raised the game and you've just effectively cut off another lateral movement path by doing that. And so this is why, sometimes it feels like Microsoft moves slow on defaults and changing defaults because they're so impactful to literally billions of Windows PCs out there in the world. And so doing it by a burn down migration where it's just as you're deploying net new, it changes. It has a long tail, but you start to get to the point where here we are near the end of Windows 10 end of life, and almost every net new Windows 11 PC now is going to have VBS turned on by default. It's going to have CredGuard turned on by default. It's going to have TPM 2.0. Those are really help move the state of security forward, and especially as Windows 11 continues to gain in its maturity. It's really exciting times where something that was dismissed as, well, this is a new coat of paint. It's a new UI, and it's really not that big a deal, has really steadily and quietly become a pretty big upgrade, especially for security practitioners.
All right. So then the final section in the blog talks about how Microsoft is adopting a best practice of a vulnerability disclosure policy and CVE disclosures. And so I thought this was really interesting because it's not only a commitment to become more secure, but also to become more transparent with some of the things that are going on with Microsoft products. So for example, the adoption of the CW, which is the common weakness enumeration, and the CPE, which is the common platform enumeration on every single CVE record is pretty important. And that, again, shows to the transparency of the things that we're trying to do to make things more secure. Microsoft is now issuing CVEs for critical cloud service vulnerabilities, regardless of whether customers need to install a patch or take action themselves. We're also publishing root cause data for Microsoft CVEs using the CWE industry standard. And we're also empowering customers to detect and document their own intrusions. Like, for example, Microsoft Purview expanded its audit logging and retention periods, and Copilot has a bunch of new prompt books that are pre-built in to automate security related tasks such as incident investigations, user analysis, threat intelligence assessments. And then one of the things that is near and dear to my heart now that I'm working with DoD, we published an entire document on guidance for DoD's zero trust strategy with activities that categorize and target advanced phases to achieve full zero trust adoption by 2032. This was also really good for anyone who's not in DoD because it maps specific things for Microsoft to zero trust strategies that you could implement yourself in organizations. So a lot of good stuff here as far as being transparent and disclosing things as far as our solutions go.
That's a pretty big change with disclosing those cloud vulnerabilities, where most oftentimes there's nothing customers need to do. There's no action required. That's why you have a SaaS service or a PaaS service, is because the service provider takes care of it. So it's literally just being transparent for transparency's sake, because there's no impact or action required by anyone other than Microsoft themselves. And so that's cool. I mean, that's a really positive direction. And then some of these other changes, lengthening the audit retention period for some of the Purview technologies, and yeah, some all really good stuff here. And then Security Copilot, you talked about the new prompt books. Another plug as well on that, we also recently announced some agent capabilities. And I know agentic and agents is like the new buzzword here, but some interesting capabilities there to help you triage like queues of, say, data loss prevention alerts and pull out the ones that are most germane and in need of human investigation is a pretty neat feature. And those agents are human monitored, so you're always in control of them. You can give them guidance on find more of this, find less of this, and tune the agent's behavior over time. But a really powerful first step towards, again, augmenting human ingenuity, helping humans do what they do best, which is not go through 10,000 alerts in a queue. It's reviewing the 7 interesting alerts in the queue. And as we learn to move the right work to the right scenario, that's really helpful to improve the state of security as well.
Yeah, and then a couple things, just from our view, how SFI has impacted us as Microsoft employees. Again, there's the passwordless, phish resistant MFA was one of them for sure.
Big one.
Another thing that I know has impacted, especially us in the field, we used to have access to sales data. So, different things that we track from our metrics, our CRM database, that used to be available just on our regular corp issued PC without any other security controls. Of course, like our core PCs has been locked down for years. There's mandatory Intune and security policies and all this other stuff, conditional access, compliant devices, so on and so forth. But we added in a requirement for network on top of that, which is you must be on VPN. And we were almost at the point where we were deprecating VPN for a lot of things. And then all of a sudden we're like, wait, what? We got a VPN in for this? And so there's several things that you have to VPN in for, which is not necessarily like, okay, I'm going to disregard all security controls by getting on CorpNet, but adding it as another factor, layering on another thing that you have to do in order to access certain data. And so that was, I know, impactful for a lot of people because it's just another thing, because we don't normally have VPN enabled by default. Although that's, I think, is changing with the global secure access that's rolling out.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of changes. We're replacing our older legacy VPN with global secure access, and that is rolling out by default to a lot of people, and that is an always on type VPN. So
a SASE solution.
SASE solution, yeah. And like for me as a technical specialist, I do a lot of demos. Our demo environment was decimated. Like you could not have any rogue subscriptions, any rogue demo environments, anything that was associated or paid for by Microsoft had to be locked down to a certain standard. It had to be approved by security. And what's crazy is that there were service principals that are automatically deployed into any demo environment that's approved and paid for by Microsoft. We do have global admin, but if we deploy anything, we loosen security standards, it gets reported up to something crazy like my M4 or 5. Like it's high up. They get a report like Deb Cup level, like something crazy. Of course, she's not checking it, but like her admin or someone who's checking the report, and they send an email on their behalf. And it's like, hey, you need to go in and resolve these vulnerabilities, these cloud security posture things that are flagging. If I have a public IP that's associated with a VM, nope, can't do that. If you have Defender for Cloud turned off on anything, nope, can't do that. So we have all these standards that are being watched by these service principals that if you can go in and turn it off for a specific time, but they'll get flagged and then you got to go back in and turn it back on. So those are all things that have impacted me. Anything that was rogue is all shut down. Every domain that I used to have that had a subscription that isn't controlled by Microsoft had to be deleted. So
yeah, these are probably the big two to highlight here among the changes from SFI. The biggest one, of course, was the phish-resistant MFA for all 220,000 employees and vendors. And the VPN one was a little interesting. And you have to go back to, we did a lot of, honestly, raging against network-based security. And you have to contextualize that in the point that our argument was you shouldn't rely solely on the network. You shouldn't go to the moat and castle approach where you build this moat, your firewalls around, and then everything inside the castle is considered secure. Well, the problem is if someone rolls a Trojan horse inside, you've got a problem because now you don't have any controls on the inside. And so you need a different approach. And this is in the era when a lot of organizations were still saying, oh, well, if you're on CorpNet, you don't need to do MFA. And we know today that's crazy. Don't do that. This was layering in, as Andy, you made the point, an additional control without relaxing any other controls. So we are still looking for phish-resistant MFA. We're still looking for a managed and compliant Intune enrolled device. We're still looking for a low or no risk sign-in. We're still looking for we're still looking for a sign-in risk that's low, user risk that's low, all of those sorts of things. So it's one of those where it's an additional control, and VPN is not the solution of the future. That will be SASE and those kind of micro VPN models, and we are rolling that out as well. But it was a way to mitigate some risk and add additional security to some of those most sensitive applications and environments. So they chose to move forward with it. And finally, you talked about all the demo environments being shut down. I got messaged all the time saying, hey, you have all these old demo environments, which, by the way, I thought I got rid of, or I thought they killed. And they're like, do you still need this? No, I don't. Take them all, delete them all, get rid of them. I don't want them. And so there was a huge cleanup effort. And like you said, Andy, a lot of visibility up to very high levels of the management chain. So got that all cleaned up here. And there's more cleanup always coming around the corner where there's just now more controls on, hey, you have this loop workspace. This needs to have 2 FTE owners now, and you need to label it with a Microsoft Purview information protection label, or we will delete it effectively. So, there's all of these just little pings, little messages all the time saying, hey, you got to up your game here. Hey, we changed the policy there. And it's been not overly burdensome, and everyone's on board. And that's been the really exciting part is I don't sense any pushback where it's people rolling their eyes going, oh, here we go again, more SFI garbage. Instead, it's like, yes, more SFI stuff. This is great. Let's harden this. Let's secure this even more. Everyone is really rowing the boat in the same direction, which I don't know if I've ever seen that the way I have with this effort and everyone understanding it. So maybe that's a win for cybersecurity all up to where we have reached the point when people are enthusiastic and excited to help improve cybersecurity posture, because we know you usually got your detractors and they were loud and they were first in many cases. And so it's an exciting change.
Yeah, for sure. Well, hopefully you learned something from this. We'll put the link for the blog by Brett Arsenal in the show notes so you can read through if you're interested. Thanks for listening and watching as always. Our contact information will be in the show notes if you have any questions or topics you want us to talk about in the future. Thanks. We'll talk to you guys next week.
Thank you for listening to the Blue Security Podcast. Please check out the show notes, catch up on episodes you may have missed, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Find Andy on Twitter @AJaw0 and Adam @AJ Brewer. See you at our next episode.